Wow, thank you. I really like speaking in St. Louis. So this is my hometown. And don't be offended for the fact that I dressed up. I know I was supposed to come here business casual. My grandmother knew Mr. Danforth. And she told me stories when I was a little kid about going to Purina. And she said, you always dress up when you go see Purina. And so in honor of my grandfather, or grandmother, I actually put on a necktie. This is the first presentation I will deliver with a necktie on this year, probably the only one. And I love the topic, adaptability and innovation. In fact, I like it so much that I took it literally because I was sitting in the back for the last couple of speeches. And I decided, based on that, and also something that somebody in the audience told me, that my speech that I had written and prepared and rehearsed was inappropriate. So sitting in the back, about 20 minutes ago, I rewrote this entire presentation. And then I was just told that the entire event is running over time, so I should cut it short. So you're going to see me, if I can use the phrase, eat the dog food today, and adapt a presentation on the fly, and talk about some things that I think are very profound. And this is very personal for me because, you know, this is my hometown, and what Purina means to this community is really important. And this is not the first time I've spoken at Nestle Purina. Did anyone see my previous speech that I gave last September? Was anyone? Okay, one in the back. So it wasn't that long ago that I was invited to come and address a group from Nestle Purina. And at the time, my company Square, which I founded, was doing about $300 million in sales on a weekly basis. And we're now doing $700 million, so things are looking up for Square. I had just started a company called Launch Code, which is it was a nonprofit, not anything that I'm going to talk about today. But something very interesting was happening across town while I was giving this other presentation. And I've added this to this speech because I think it's an interesting parallel. I was working with another multi-billion-dollar St. Louis-based company that was founded and run by generations by locals. It had also been purchased by a multinational corporation, and they buy a lot of grain. And this is what happened to Anheuser-Busch and their flagship product, Budweiser. While I was talking to your company across town, craft beer sales had just displaced the king. And nobody really noticed this at the time. It didn't make a big news. But it's profound because I remember so much growing up in the shadow of Purina and Anheuser-Busch. And it seemed to me that it was a very interesting topic to explore. So I took a meeting when I was invited to come out with Mark Donovan. Is Mark in the room today? Did Mark make it out here today? Does anyone know Mark? A couple people. Okay. So Mark works on innovation at Purina. And I was invited to come out and talk to him. And he told me something very interesting and sort of scary. He said that Purina had this dominant market share in the big retailers, but in the small pet stores, you guys couldn't get placement. You guys can't move product through Wally's Pets and the like. And it struck me that there might be an adaptability issue. And so when I'd heard this, I thought, well, maybe I can help. Maybe I can suggest something. And I have some crazy friends. I have actually almost all crazy friends. And one of my crazy friends is this caterer who has come up with her own version of dog food. So she takes the scraps, she mixes them together, and she claims that the dog food that she serves her dogs makes their poop disappear. Okay, so yes, we're talking about dog shit. From the stage, here we go. So I suggested to Mark, I said, would this possibly be a good product for Purina? I said, think about this. What if you could sell a dog food? The end result didn't show up on your yard and stay there. Would that be a good product or not? Now, that was all I did. That was all I did. I introduced the two of them. I said, this lady has a formula. She claims it does this. You guys have a testing facility out in northwestern Missouri. You guys might want to get together. But if it works, I bet you the independents would want to sell this. And I don't know what happened to this idea that was given to you guys over a year and a half ago. Does anyone in here know what happened? I'm serious. Dead serious. Okay. Could this be a good product? I mean, maybe. I mean, you take different. Maybe it's a great product, or maybe, you know, the fact that you got dog shit in your yard means that the kids stay inside, and then they get lonely, and then they need another pet, right? So, could be a good idea, could be a bad idea. Did it make its way through the organization? That's my question. Did the idea ever go anywhere? So I checked with my friend, and she hadn't heard anything more. And I haven't checked with Mark, and it's really none of my business. It was just an idea that was thrown out. But I thought about the issue that was being addressed by this topic, and you know, we talk about adaptability, and we talk about, you know, what needs to be done. But so often, it just doesn't happen, right? And then I was listening to Ray's talk, and this is one of the reasons I rewrote my speech, was because, you know, Ray was talking about adaptability in a crisis, right? If something is really going wrong, what do we do? How do we handle a crisis? And I think in many of those cases, we rise to the occasion, right? You know, if you're in a crisis, if you're in a fire, you know, you're going to do stuff. You've just, you know, crashed a helicopter. Yeah, I'm a pilot. And, you know, we take this stuff seriously. He was right. We count the souls on board. That's how we abbreviate on the manifest. When you file a flight plan, you write SOB. So we count SOBs. But what happens if there's no crisis? Right? What happens if you're in a dominant, market-leading company? And you're just killing it. And I think when it comes to, you know, pet food, you have no equal, right? I don't even know who second place is. Your position, much like what Anheuser-Busch had for a while, is so dominant that there is no crisis. So the things we do to rise to the occasion in a crisis and be adaptable in a crisis, well, they don't necessarily always find their way into an organization. And I myself suffer from these problems because I have several companies right now that are doing really well. And it's hard when things are going well to want to change, to move. And it's easy to say, well, things are going well, let's just keep doing it the same way. So this is what I want to target my speech towards today, which is the way I've found 3 tricks to sort of help the organizations that I work with continue to adapt even in the face of success. And they come down to 3 areas. Information, the attitude you have towards that information, and the attitude you have towards failure, and then the mental state that it feels like to innovate. And I think these things are what I'd like to focus my abbreviated talk on today. And then hopefully, if we've got enough time, I'd like to even save enough time to have a couple questions at the end. Okay? And I'm going to move really fast. So let's talk about information. Okay, so we all know that we are buried in information. And this has become a truism. The interesting thing about this is if you look back in history, it's always been true, right? Every group always feels like they're getting too much information. And there's a very good reason for this. And that is information, at least since the age of the printing press, has grown at an exponential rate. And if you look at human evolution, our brains never evolved to look at geometrically increasing patterns. We are hunters, we are gatherers, we are adapted to essentially go out and hunt stuff and to see linear patterns. So if you see a pattern that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, that's great. If you see a pattern that goes 1, 2, 4, 16, 32, your brain just shuts down. We are just not hardwired in our heads to see this sort of growth. And because of this, when we are confronted with things that are growing geometrically, which is the amount of information is growing geometrically, we can't handle it. We shut down. We fail to process this. And this is a huge problem, even if you know that it's a problem. So even if I tell you this and I say, okay, now you've been warned of the problem, go do something, we don't have the hardware for it, right? And we were facing this problem at Square. Now, Square, for those of you who don't know, it's a payments company. We move billions of dollars. And when you move billions of dollars, people try to steal billions of dollars, right? That's their job. Your job is to protect it, okay? And the more we move, the more people try to steal from us. And so we have had to create these systems to combat some very, very clever thieves. And to do this, we stumbled onto this technique that has been incredibly effective, and that is to take advantage of a part of the human brain that did evolve massive capacity, and that is our visual abilities. And at Square, what we do is we take all behavior, you know, charges, how fast people are registering new cards. We take all this data. We have thousands of little data points. We take it all, we clump it together, and then we graph it and put it on monitors that sit around the office. We have about 20 of these things. And on those monitors, we see these patterns of behavior. You know, so we can see when there's a snowstorm because, you know, buying drops down on some of the monitors. You actually see what the world is doing with money. But the other thing that's interesting, and we didn't really know how we would see it at the beginning, but we can see fraud. We see fraud. Because it turns out that if somebody's actually trying to steal your money, what they first do is they say, well, I'm going to steal some money from this company or this person, and they behave a little bit differently. Now, do we know exactly how they behave differently? No, we don't. But what we know is that that behavior changes the way our monitors graph their information. And even though we are living in this sea of massive data, our eyes recognize it. So we fight fraud through our eyes. Now, how can this possibly help you? You guys are all drowning in data, right? And this is a marketing group. You're also tasked with communicating with people who are drowning in data. Any visual tools you can use get around the geometric inadequacies of our brain. It's a great trick. I just wanted to share it with you today. It's working at Square. I think it could work in areas that you're facing. The other issue with adaptability is the attitude that we have towards change. And I pulled this phrase from, the original phrase was keep calm and carry on, right? That's what the British used to say. But I changed it a little bit to this idea that failure should be embraced. Now, I come from Silicon Valley these days. So I'm born in St. Louis, but my company is really based in Silicon Valley. We have a much different attitude towards failure in the Valley, which is that it's okay. You try something, it doesn't work, it's okay. But it's also, if you're in a corporation, especially if you're in an organization that's running well, it's very difficult to cultivate a positive attitude towards failure, because failure is never really rewarded, right? And I'm not asking for rewards for failure, but I am going to give you two different mindsets that will change, hopefully, your belief set with failure. So I have this very strange resume. For years, so I'm trained as an engineer, okay? My father was an engineer. I studied engineering, and I spent most of my time in school studying how to build things. And then I got out of school, and I opened up a glassblowing studio. So how many of you guys have heard of Third Degree? Some of the St. Louisans? Okay, good. So the St. Louis, so I teach glassblowing. As a matter of fact, I have the #1 textbook on glassblowing, recently translated into Norwegian. Okay. And there's an interesting thing that I learned in my life as an artist, which is how to think of the process of creation. So let me explain how glassblowing works. Basically, you take this hot, molten, globby piece of glass, and then you have to manipulate it. And the way we do this is we put it on a blowpipe and we rotate it. Okay. Now, the reason we rotate it is that without the rotation, gravity would grab it and just pull it onto the floor. So you're constantly balancing this thing. But you never balance it perfectly, and the glass is always a little bit out of balance. And I studied glassblowing for about 3 or 4 years when I met somebody who sort of explained the secret to me. He said, glassblowing is all about error correction. It's never going to be perfect. And I've come from this world of numbers and math and engineering, and I was looking for some sort of perfection. I was looking for control. But that's impossible in the world of glass because, by definition, this object that is moving is never going to be perfect. And even if it is perfect for just a fraction of a second, well, that second's over, and the next second it's going to be out of bounds because gravity is going to pull it that way. And so the attitude of the artist, the successful artist, at least in the glass studio, is that it's always wrong. You're in a constant state of failure. And you say, oh, well, that would be very depressing. But it turns out, once you embrace the fact that, look, that's how this game is played, we are always off, then failure is no longer a stigma. And when I saw this in the glass studio, I then noticed a parallel in my work as an engineer, because what do engineers do? Well, we work on stuff that doesn't work. And how many of you guys have seen the Square Reader, the little thing that fits in a credit card? Okay, so I built that. In homage to Ben, I got the thing working in 3 weeks. Okay. So, and I had to go to China, I swear. But the first one I built was not made in China. It was actually made in Dogtown. And it was made because we had a deadline. And we had a meeting with Steve Jobs. And this was back, so Steve was pretty sick back then. And if you knew Steve, like, he had a really crazy temper when he was well, right? And now he's medicated. So you never know what's going to happen. And I was very, very nervous because we were going to go in front of Steve Jobs. And Steve is also very concerned about aesthetics. And I was very worried that I would make something and it wouldn't be beautiful enough and he'd just throw it away and we'd never get our hearing. So I went into the Apple store and I looked at what Apple was making, and I saw that all of their stuff had this beautiful brushed aluminum on it. You know, the iPads, the high-end MacBooks, you know, they were brushed aluminum. And I thought, my God, I got to make my stuff out of aluminum. So I got a piece of aluminum, took it down to Dogtown, machined it, and finally crammed the electronics into this piece of aluminum. And put it in my phone, tested it out, it worked, handed it to my partner, Jack, didn't work. He handed it back to me, I was like, it works. I handed it to him. No, Jim, it doesn't work. Went back and forth a couple times. Finally, I noticed that when Jack was swiping the credit card through this little device, he was holding it with his fingers to keep it from spinning, because it would spin in the headphone jack. And of course, when I did it, I just let it spin and didn't touch it. Well, it turns out, that because aluminum is an electrically conductive material, and because the grounding pin on an iPad is not the 4th pin, which it should be, but the 3rd pin, I had basically built a very complicated heart monitor. And it was picking up Jack's heartbeat while he tried to swipe the thing. So we got Jack a pair of gloves and taught him not to touch the thing, and the demo went off. But the point is, the product I made was a total failure. Like, by any stretch of the imagination, you would say, this is not a good product, right? Something that you can't touch and it, you know, during its use. But the point is that as the guy who made it, as the engineer who had to build it, my only attitude was, of course it's screwed up, and the next one I will make will be less screwed up. And so I went back into the studio, made them plastic, and they've been plastic ever since. And so both the attitude of the artist towards failure, which is that nothing's ever perfect, and the attitude towards the engineer, which is that, look, if you're an engineer, you're never going to work on stuff that's perfect anyway. If it's perfected, you don't need an engineer. So both of my schools, art and engineering, have sort of led me to this idea that, look, you're in a constant state of failure. Just like any good missile, right? If you got to talk to the folks, good folks at Boeing, they will tell you that a missile is always off target. But at some point, it gets close enough that the megatonnage makes up for it. So, how does all this feel? And this is something I've struggled with trying to explain, because, in fact, it's an uncomfortable feeling when you are innovating, when you're doing something different, when you're adapting, when you are changing what is normal. Every human should be sort of uncomfortable with this. And I was trying to find a way to explain what it felt like for me to change and invent and do all this stuff. And I couldn't find a good business example. But I did find one from a ski trip I took back in college. So my friends were lucky enough to get their parents' condo out in it was Steamboat Springs. And I happened to be in Colorado at the time, and my friends called me up. I was like, Jim, we got this condo, come for the weekend. All right. So I thought, cool, I'll get in the car, drive. Now, at the time, I was driving a 1987 Toyota Tercel. Okay. It was white. And as I drove down the road, my view, there was a storm coming. And as I drove down the road, my view of the road changed from this to this. And the only thing I could see was this little, I don't even know if you can see it from back there, there was this little reflector. I didn't even know they did this, but it turns out on American highways, they put a reflector by the edge of the road once a mile. And the problem was I didn't have 1 mile visibility. And I'm the sort of guy who's, naturally sort of fearful, and I thought, well, I should pull over, right? I should just get off the road and wait out the storm. But I started doing the math in my head, and I thought, okay, I'm driving a 2,200-pound white Toyota Tercel, okay? And somewhere behind me, I knew, was a 16,000-pound plow truck being driven to 60 miles an hour by a guy who probably hadn't slept for a while. And I don't even know where the edge of the road is, but I have this feeling that if I stop, I'm probably going to be killed. And I would love to have had clear vision. I would love to have been able to see the next marker, but that wasn't the deal. What I could do was I could drive to one marker and sort of correct, get back on the road, and then I would have to guess which way the road was going, and I would drive that way. And if I was right, I would end up with another marker at some point. And if I was wrong, I would end up with, being off the road and trying to get back on. And I would love to have been driving on a clear day, but that wasn't the deal. And I was afraid the entire time. I've been just speaking for myself. That's what innovation feels like to me. And I spend my time mostly working on new stuff. And I've had 6 successful companies. Things are going pretty well. But every day when I'm doing something new, this is what it feels like. I've never been able to get over the fear. When I fly airplanes, so I fly my airplane, I'm afraid. Guess what? You can learn to handle this feeling. It's possible. And I will tell you this. When I finally got there to Steamboat Springs, there were not many other people at the mountain. And it was absolutely the best skiing of my life. So I encourage you, as people who work for one of the most successful companies, to embrace these fears. None of this stuff is easy, but that's what we do. And I finished 5 minutes early, so I can take 5 minutes of questions if you have them. Thank you. Or we can be really on time and all leave. Oh, yes, please.
How do you allow yourself to feel this fear and keep moving forward if there are other approaches to make changes you don't embrace?
Yeah, awesome. So I'm pretty lucky because I'm usually at the top of the companies. I've always started companies. I've never had to work up, except for a while when I was at IBM. Okay, I was at IBM for this is probably the same white shirt. For back in the IBM days. Communicating up is not an area of expertise for me, but I will say this. When I am managing down, so I can give you the other perspective. Okay. When I'm managing down, what I'm looking for is somebody who genuinely cares about a problem and can explain why. Okay. But there's a second part to your question, and I'd like to answer that, which is how you keep going when you're afraid. All right? And I think we have this bad attitude towards fear. We take, at least in the public media, this attitude that fear is something to be conquered, right? You overcome your fear, or you're the sort of person who, handles their fear. I've talked to a lot of people, and it's certainly true for myself. It turns out that it's perfectly fine to be afraid as long as you're not paralyzed. So one of the things that was very interesting to me was when I learned to fly airplanes. It turns out I'm a very scared pilot. But it also turns out that I'm a very good pilot when I'm scared. So I did all my tests, I was scared. If I get into trouble, I'm scared. But guess what? I can fly a plane scared. It's just normal for me. And after a while of doing it, it sort of becomes fun, right? There's this point at which you become, sort of able to handle that. So I know I didn't really answer your question because unfortunately I'm not the guy to answer it, but I will say this. You see that passion in the person who's working in your organization, and managers are desperate to have that, okay? Because there's no way to incentivize that. Actually, I was in a meeting this morning. One of the guys who runs one of my companies was telling me, oh, Jim, we have this incentive problem. We want to keep everybody incentive. Guess what? No incentive structure works perfectly. Like, we've tried everything. I've got a guy, not kidding, I've got a $10 million starting salary for a job opening at Square right now. 1 year, $10 million bucks is what we're offering. We can't get anyone to take the job. I know. Like, the incentive system is never going to work perfectly. As a manager, what you look for is passion in the person. So I would imagine if you're a person and can explain that passion, even though you're maybe afraid of the thing or can't prove it, hopefully you'll have a manager who will let you give it a shot. It's a great question. Any others? Okay then. Well, thank you very much.